My sister convinced our parents that I was a troublemaker and had me kicked out of the house a year ago. I could never have imagined my family turning their backs on me, but now it's a reality, all because of my stepsister, Katie. Katie had a knack for exaggeration and drawing attention to herself, but I never thought her lies would destroy my life. From a young age, Katie always monopolized attention. Although we never got along, I tried to be a good sister. When I was 10, my mom remarried, and a few years later, Katie was born. She was always treated as special in the family, considered flawless and deeply loved by both my mom and my stepdad, Ben. I didn't envy her, but her position in the family was entirely different. She was the center of attention, while I was left in the shadows. Katie knew exactly how to use her perceived uniqueness to manipulate people. She was aware of her talent for controlling others, and at times, it was even frightening. It all started with seemingly insignificant things. Katie began telling my mom and Ben that I was acting strange and not coming home on time. These stories caused mild irritation in my parents. No one took them seriously until I started living on my own after graduating from university. By then, I was 24 years old, working on building my future, but my family seemed to view me differently. I noticed growing suspicion in their attitudes, though I couldn't understand what had caused the shift. One day, my mom called me in a tense voice and said, "Jenny, I need to talk to you. Can you come over?" I wasn't suspicious. On the contrary, I thought it would be about something routine or neutral. When I entered the house and looked into the living room, the atmosphere immediately felt heavy. Ben was sitting on the couch with his arms crossed and a stern expression. Mom stood nearby, her face resolute, while Katie looked like an angel in the flesh, innocent and concerned. Everything about her demeanor screamed, "I'm here to help." But deep down, I had a gnawing suspicion, something wasn't right. Mom started speaking in a firm tone. I heard from Katie. She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "Are you using drugs?" she finished. The question was so absurd that at first, I laughed. "No, I'm not using drugs," I replied firmly, trying to figure out where such an accusation could have come from. Ben looked at me with disapproval before speaking. "Katie told us she found drugs in your room last weekend when you stayed over." My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Katie had never been in my room. It was a blatant, outrageous lie. "That's impossible because she never went into my room," I protested. Katie interjected, her voice soft and sympathetic. "I didn't want to say anything, but I'm worried about you, Jenny. Your recent behavior, it's been strange. I had to talk to Mom and Ben." She looked at me with a feigned expression of concern that could have convinced anyone she genuinely cared. I was shaken to my core. All my attempts to argue and explain that this was a lie hit a wall of doubt. Mom and Ben clearly leaned toward believing Katie. Her innocent appearance and talent for playing the role of the caring sister made her story convincing. At that moment, I realized that no matter what I said, it wouldn't change their minds. That evening marked a turning point. My family, whom I had trusted, now looked at me as if I were a stranger. Katie had succeeded in her scheme, destroying everything that tied me to my home. I stood in the living room, feeling my world collapse beneath my feet. Katie had skillfully sown seeds of doubt in their minds. The glances exchanged between my mother and Ben made it clear that her story resonated with them more than my desperate attempts to defend myself. It felt as though my years of living in this family, my integrity and decency, had been erased in an instant. Ben frowned and said, "That's not all. Katie also mentioned that you've been associating with some questionable people. Jenny, are you selling yourself for money?" Those words struck me like a lightning bolt. I couldn't believe that Ben, the man who had watched me grow up, could even entertain such a thought. It was absurd, offensive, unthinkable. I clenched my teeth, fighting back my anger, and declared loudly, Why don't you believe me? Katie is lying. But my words, like a gentle breeze, couldn't penetrate the wall Katie had so skillfully built between me and my family. Her trap had worked flawlessly. Ben seemed to have already accepted her lies as truth, and my mother, though appearing less resolute, still hesitated. Her voice was soft, almost pleading, as she said, "Jenny, we just want to help you. If you're really struggling, we need to know. We want to be there for you." I raised my voice, tears stinging my eyes. "I'm not struggling. I haven't done anything. Katie is lying." But the more I spoke, the clearer it became that my words weren't reaching them. Katie sat nearby, her hands folded in her lap, her face radiating fake concern and innocence. "I really didn't want to say anything," she said, lowering her gaze. "But I'm worried about you, Jenny. I just don't want you to go down the wrong path, like my friend. You remember her? She thought she could handle it all, but it ended badly." Her voice was soft, but every word cut into me like a blade. I saw my mother look away, as if avoiding my eyes to keep from seeing my pain. Ben stood up, his voice calm but cold. "Enough, Jenny. We can't believe you if you won't be honest. We love you, but we have to keep our distance." Those words, "keep our distance," pierced me like a dagger. They no longer wanted to accept me as part of the family. I left that day, not knowing what to do next, realizing that the world I knew was crumbling. In the days that followed, I faced the fallout of Katie's actions. Her lies spread with frightening speed. She began spreading rumors around town that I was supposedly a drug addict. Her words fell on fertile ground. People I had known for years began to look at me with suspicion. Even my boss called me into his office, his face tense. "Jenny, I've heard some unpleasant things. We can't afford unreliable employees." I lost my job. It was humiliating, painful. My friends started disappearing one by one. Some stopped answering my calls, others came up with excuses to avoid meeting me. I was in shock. In an instant, Katie had destroyed not only my relationship with my family but also my reputation, my life. Every time I tried to confront her, she found a way to twist my words, making me appear even more guilty in the eyes of others. "Jenny, I only wanted to help. Is it my fault that you're taking everything so personally?" she would say with feigned sincerity, and her words resonated with those who listened. I felt trapped by the web of her manipulations. My loneliness grew with each passing day. It seemed like I had lost all control over my own life. Katie basked in the attention her lies brought her, while I was left alone, shattered. My mother called me and told me never to come home again. Her voice was cold and resolute, though there was a hint of pity in her words. "Jenny, it's better this way if we keep our distance until you get help. I can't allow you to be here. Think not only of yourself but also of Katie." I listened, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, as a storm of emotions churned inside me. My mother, the one person who was supposed to stand by me in difficult times, was now pushing me away. I had lost everything, yet for her, Katie was the victim. That was the last straw. I couldn't take it anymore. Gathering my belongings, I left my hometown, determined to start over. The new city became both a salvation and a curse. It offered me a chance to escape the past, but it also brought fear and isolation. My family, the people I trusted the most, had become strangers. My relationships with them were utterly destroyed, and I had no idea how to move forward. Months went by. Every time I thought about calling them, a wave of resentment rose within me. I couldn't forget how they had looked at me that day, as if I were a stranger. As if everything I had ever done didn't matter. The years we had spent together were erased like words written in sand, washed away by a wave. I couldn't forgive them, not my mother, not Ben, and certainly not Katie. Over time, I began to wonder why Katie had done what she did. What drove her? Was it just jealousy? Or were there deeper, darker reasons behind her actions? What kind of person could so coldly destroy someone's life and still sleep soundly at night? These questions haunted me, but I had no answers. All I could do was try to move on. A year passed. Slowly, I began to rebuild what I had lost. I found a new job and met new people. But the bitterness of losing my family lingered deep inside me, like an indelible stain. I didn't know if they would ever take me back or if they would see through the lies Katie had so skillfully constructed. One thing was clear: if they wanted to mend our relationship, they would have to acknowledge the truth about who Katie really was. Despite my efforts, things didn't get easier. The sense of betrayal was like an unhealed wound. My family continued to pull me back, reminding me of them every day. Each time I dreamed of my mother or recalled moments from my childhood, the pain became unbearable. Katie's lies had seeped into every corner of my life, destroying not only my reputation but also my sense of self. I had lost friends, my job, and, most importantly, my faith in myself. My trust in the world was shattered. But nothing compared to my mother's betrayal. That day, when she turned her back on me as I desperately tried to explain myself and appeal to her reason, was forever etched in my memory. I remembered going home, thinking that if we could just talk calmly, she would understand. I hoped that the woman who once cheered for me at soccer games, who beamed with pride at my school achievements, who hugged me when I was in pain, still existed in her heart. I hoped she would come back to me, even for a moment. But when I opened the door, the tension in the air hit me like a cold wind. Ben sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed. His gaze was heavy, filled with judgment, as if I were not his stepdaughter but some contemptible being. And with that, a new chapter of my descent began. Katie was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't spot her, but I was certain she was nearby, lurking, listening, waiting for the right moment to strike again. It was her style to observe from the shadows as everything fell apart, all while maintaining her spotless, innocent image in the eyes of others. My mother stood by the kitchen counter, her posture radiating determination, her stern expression saying more than words ever could. The decision had already been made. "Mom, we need to talk," I said, trying to stay calm though my voice trembled. "I just need you to hear me out." There was no response. She remained silent, and that silence was worse than any accusation. I felt an invisible weight pressing on my chest, the noose tightening with every second. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling slightly. Finally, she took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts, and said, "Jenny, there's nothing left to discuss. I gave you a chance, but nothing has changed." Her words were as cold as a winter wind, cutting through me. "You only believe Katie," I exclaimed, my voice breaking as tears welled up in my eyes. "Everything she says is a lie. Please, just listen to my side." My mother shook her head, her gaze impenetrable, burning more fiercely than fire. "Enough, Jenny. Katie has always cared about you. I have no reason not to believe her." Those words stabbed my heart like a knife. Anger flared within me, a fire that had been suffocating for air. I could no longer hold back. "She's lying because she hates me," I shouted. "She wants to be the center of attention. She wants everyone to focus on her." My voice echoed through the empty kitchen, but my mother's expression remained unchanged. It was as if she couldn't hear me at all. "This isn't good for you or for Katie," she said firmly. "Until you're ready to ask for help, it's better that you don't come here." I froze, unable to believe my ears. "Do you seriously think I need help?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not on drugs, I'm not selling myself, I'm not doing any of the things I've been accused of. It's all lies, fabricated by Katie." Why do I have to suffer because of her manipulations? But her eyes stayed cold as ice. She didn't even flinch. Jenny, I can't tolerate this atmosphere any longer. Just leave, she said, lowering her gaze. Those words, that indifference, everything around me seemed to stop. It was as if the world had frozen, leaving me at the center of the chaos. The walls felt like they were closing in, leaving no way out. I said nothing more. Grabbing my things, I walked out of the house that was no longer my home. A place where I was no longer welcome, where there was no warmth, no understanding. I went to my only friend, Amy. She welcomed me with kindness, offering me a place on her couch while I tried to piece my life back together. Amy was kind, but even she couldn't fully grasp what I was going through. One evening, as we sat on her small balcony, she cautiously suggested, "Why don't you call your parents? Maybe they've reconsidered." I gave a bitter smile. I knew too well that no reconsideration had taken place. They had rejected me, and it was a choice they had made willingly. Amy looked at me with sympathy, but a flicker of doubt crossed her eyes. She was trying to support me, but I could feel the limits of her understanding. Until someone experiences betrayal from their loved ones firsthand, they can never truly grasp what it means to be abandoned by those you hold dear. Months turned into years. I tried to build a new life, but every time I saw a happy family in the park or overheard someone talking about their parents, my heart clenched. It felt as though Katie had taken up permanent residence in my mind. Every step I took, every new beginning, reminded me of what she had stolen from me. Amy did everything she could to support me, but her efforts seemed insufficient. One evening, as rain drummed against the windows, she spoke up. "Jenny, you're strong. But maybe you should give them another chance. Maybe try to rebuild your family." I stared silently out the window, thinking about how I had been betrayed not just by Katie's words, but by my mother's actions. I didn't know if I could ever move past it. I was trying to rebuild my life, but it felt like an arduous journey through a dense, impenetrable forest where every step met resistance. The rumors Katie had spread followed me like a shadow. Even in a new city, they found me, as if someone was determined to ensure my reputation remained tarnished. Every job application was rejected. Each refusal felt like another nail in the coffin, isolating me from a normal life. People began to see me as someone untrustworthy. I was forced to rely on odd jobs to make ends meet. It felt as though I had lost my way in my own life. But 2 years after leaving home, something unexpected happened. It was an ordinary Saturday. I was working at a small cafe where I had finally found a steady job as a barista. It wasn't my dream job, but it was my lifeline. I stood behind the counter, wiping the surface, when a man approached me. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. "Jenny," he called hesitantly. I turned to face him, and he smiled faintly. His face struck a chord deep within me, but I couldn't immediately recognize him. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "It's Chris." And then it all clicked. It was Chris, the guy Katie had dated a few years ago. They had broken up around the time my life began to unravel, but I never expected to see him here, in this little cafe. What did he want? I wanted to turn and walk away, but I forced a strange smile and asked, "It's been a while, Chris. What brings you here?" He looked nervous, his gaze darting around, and his hand ran through his hair. "I know this is strange," he began, "but I wanted to talk to you. I need to clear my conscience." I raised an eyebrow, wary. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked. Chris took a deep breath. His face reflected genuine regret, and it made me even more cautious. "Everything Katie said about you, about drugs, about prostitution, it's all a lie." I froze, as if lightning had struck right in front of me. His words were so unexpected that I couldn't immediately process them. The situation suddenly felt painfully real, and I could feel a storm brewing inside me. Chris lowered his gaze, as if ashamed. I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier. But I never thought she would go this far. Katie has her own issues, Jenny. She's always been jealous of you. I think that's why she did it. Jealous? I repeated, feeling anger mixed with shock. Jealous of what? Chris nodded and continued, you've always been strong and independent. She felt like you were more loved, like you handled life better. She wanted attention. She made you the villain, to draw it all to herself. His words felt unbelievable. I listened intently, not wanting to miss a single detail. I didn't know everything while we were dating, he admitted. But after we broke up, she told me the truth. She felt guilty, but she didn't do anything about it. I stared at him in disbelief. If you knew all this, I demanded sharply, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you stop her? My voice grew louder, reflecting the anger that had built up over the years. I could only imagine how different everything might have been if he had spoken up then. My family might have learned the truth, and I might not have lost everything. Chris mumbled an apology, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, Jenny. I didn't think it would go this far. But his words couldn't dull the pain. I looked at him, unable to comprehend how someone could stand by, knowing another person's life was being destroyed. Why? Why didn't my parents believe me? Why did they believe her but never listen to me? I exclaimed, feeling bitterness take over my entire being. Chris looked broken, but it didn't lessen my pain. His words contained the truth I had longed to hear, but they also brought the realization that all of this could have been prevented if someone had had the courage to do the right thing. Katie had an uncanny ability to manipulate people, making them doubt not only others but themselves as well. Her schemes had confused me so much that there were moments I couldn't distinguish truth from lies. But now, after all these years, it was clear. Everything she had done was driven by her jealousy, and that jealousy had destroyed my life. Chris stood in front of me, his apology still hanging in the air, but I couldn't accept it. There was no room left in me for forgiveness. I turned my back to him, saying curtly and decisively, Leave. Jenny, I'm sorry, he repeated softly. His voice was filled with regret, but I couldn't allow myself to relent. He left, leaving me alone in a silence that was louder than any of his words. I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of all those years pressing down on my shoulders. The truth had finally come out, but it brought neither relief nor peace. The years of lies had already destroyed everything I had, my family, my career, my confidence. I wondered what I was supposed to do with this truth that had come too late. It took several more years before I found a way to move forward. I relocated to another city, far from the shadows of my past, and started working in sales. Each new day brought small joys that slowly patched the holes in my heart. At some point, I met someone who taught me how to trust again. Paul entered my life 2 years ago through a mutual friend. From the start, our conversations felt as natural as breathing. He didn't ask intrusive questions about my past or judge me for the fractured ties with my family. Paul became everything to me. When he proposed, I felt like my life was finally building on a solid foundation. We planned a simple but heartfelt wedding, because what mattered most to us was what we were creating together, not outward extravagance. Yet, my past refused to let me go. Since being kicked out of the house, I had severed all contact with my mother, Ben, and Katie. I changed my phone number, blocked them on social media, and even deleted most of my accounts to avoid any interaction. Occasionally, I heard from acquaintances that my mother and Ben had tried to find me, but I ignored these attempts. Then, 6 months before the wedding, I received a letter. It was from my mother. I sat staring at the screen for a long time before opening it. My heart clenched as I read the lines filled with regret and apologies. Jenny, I think about you every day since you left. We've finally realized the mistake we made in choosing Katie over you. I cannot express how sorry I am for everything that happened. I heard from a friend that you're getting married. I would love to see you on your wedding day. Please, let me meet with you and apologize for everything I've done. Those words echoed within me. My heart wavered between anger and pain, between a desire to believe in the sincerity of her words and a fear of being betrayed again. That evening, I told Paul everything about Katie, my mother, and Ben. I told him how they turned their backs on me at a time when I needed their support the most, and how, even after hearing the truth from Chris, I couldn't find it in myself to forgive them. Paul listened carefully without interrupting. His presence always brought me peace, but that evening, I felt the resurgence of long-suppressed pain. I remembered how desperately I had hoped my family would understand me, would hear my truth. But they had chosen to believe Katie's lies instead. Do you think you should meet with her? Paul asked gently, his voice soft and cautious. I didn't know the answer. Forgiving them felt impossible, but carrying this weight in my heart was equally unbearable. Paul listened patiently, his expression filled with concern, but he didn't rush me into a decision. His calm voice was steady and reassuring as he said, Jenny, you don't have to pay for their mistakes. If you don't want to invite them, I'll support you. I knew he was right, but a deep longing for the family I had lost still lingered inside me. Even though I understood that I could never reclaim what once was, I wanted my mother to be there on the most important day of my life. Yet, I doubted if I could truly forgive their actions and start anew. A week later, I decided to respond to my mother's letter. In my reply, I thanked her for her apology but was honest about the wounds being too deep for me to pretend as if nothing had happened. I also stated that I was willing to invite her to the wedding, but Katie and Ben would not be part of the event. This was my final decision, and I wasn't willing to compromise. A few days later, I received a call from an unknown number. At first, I hesitated, but something inside urged me to answer. Jenny, my mother's voice came through the line, breaking slightly, as if she were trying to hold back tears. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. I read your letter. I'm so glad you're inviting me to your wedding, she said, her voice initially filled with joy, but it quickly shifted to a more insistent tone. Are you really not going to invite Katie? Those words made me tense up. No, I replied firmly. I'm not inviting Katie. There was silence on the other end, followed by a deep sigh as she searched for the right words. Jenny, Katie is your sister. I understand that her actions hurt you, but she's still part of our family. She's changed since then, grown up, and she wants to make amends. A wave of anger surged from the depths of my heart. I couldn't believe she was defending Katie again, the person who had destroyed my life. Her lies ruined everything, I said, my voice growing louder. And you and Ben believed her without hesitation. How can I let her come to my wedding and act like nothing ever happened? My mother's tone became pleading as she tried to reason with me. This is a chance to rebuild our family. If you don't invite Katie, I won't be able to come either. It wouldn't be fair. Those words stunned me. She was using my wedding as leverage to force me to forgive Katie. Are you serious? I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. I'm serious, Jenny, she replied. I love you and want to be there for you, but I can't abandon Katie. She's my daughter too. My heart clenched at her words. So, you're choosing her over me again? I asked, anger overwhelming me. After everything that happened, you're still taking her side? She tried desperately to explain. It's not about taking sides. It's about family, and we all need to work together. No, I said coldly. When I needed you most, you weren't there. I finally found happiness, and now you're trying to take that away too. We can start over, she pleaded. No, We can't, I said firmly and ended the call. My hands were trembling as I set the phone down. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I resolved that neither my mother nor Katie would ruin the special day I had worked so hard to reach. The months leading up to the wedding were a mix of joy and bitterness. Every step in the preparation felt like a fresh start, yet the wounds of the past still lingered. I tried to focus on the positive, pushing thoughts of the past away like dark clouds threatening to overshadow my sunny day. Planning the wedding with Paul became a source of light that drove away the shadows. Together with my bridesmaid, Rachel, we discussed every detail, from choosing the menu to deciding on the soft pastel shades of the flowers that would adorn the venue. But the most important thing for me was the dress. It symbolized a new chapter in my life, one that was pure and free from the burden of the past. Paul was my unwavering pillar of strength. He never pushed me to invite my mother or Katie, understanding how painful the topic was for me. We were building a future without looking back, but I still felt a heaviness in my heart. The family I had lost continued to occupy a place in my thoughts, especially as the wedding day approached. I thought about my father, who lived far away and had tried to remain neutral during our family turmoil. Though we hadn't been close in years, I bore no ill will toward him. He likely didn't know how to navigate such a complex situation. Yet his absence now felt as keenly painful as my mother's. The night before the wedding, Rachel hosted a small party to celebrate my last night of freedom. It was an evening filled with laughter, joy, and a sense of much-needed relief. Only close friends were there, and we laughed for hours over glasses of wine. For a moment, I felt like I could be completely happy, free from the shadow of the past. The wedding day was warm and radiant. Standing at the altar next to Paul, surrounded by friends and his family, I felt a calm certainty in my choice. My mother and Katie weren't there, but I didn't feel the weight of their absence. On the contrary, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. This was the day I claimed my right to happiness and chose a new life for myself. The past seemed distant and insignificant, like ripples on a lake that no longer disturbed its depths. But 2 months after the wedding, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer, letting it go to voicemail, but the message I heard made me freeze. "Jenny, it's Ben. Please call me back. Katie, she tried to take her own life. She's in the hospital. We really need your help, please. I'm begging you." I stood still, holding the phone to my ear as the words echoed in my mind. This isn't my responsibility, I thought. Katie had chosen her path, and I didn't owe her anything. But the desperation in Ben's voice, his plea, stayed with me. When I got home, Paul was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. I told him about the call, trying to keep my voice as steady as possible. "Katie tried to take her own life," I said, unable to completely suppress the tremor in my voice. "She's in the hospital. Ben is begging me to go." Paul paused, then set down the towel he was holding and came over to me. His eyes were filled with concern but also with his usual steadfast support. "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Should I go?" Paul wrapped his arms around me carefully and said, "Jenny, you don't owe them anything. Katie made her choices, and so did your family. You're not responsible for their decisions." His words were simple, yet so complicated. That night, I lay awake for hours, thinking about the past. Memories of Katie's lies and manipulations, of how my mother repeatedly chose her over me, refused to let me rest. Was this a chance for reconciliation? Or would I be allowing them to invade my life again, disrupting the fragile peace I had finally achieved? I decided not to go to the hospital. It was a difficult decision, but it felt like the right one. Paul supported me but asked a question that made me reflect once more. "Are you sure? I want you to make a choice you won't regret." I repeated to myself over and over, Katie chose this path. But deep down, Something whispered that there was more behind her choices than I was willing to acknowledge. I had spent too much time carrying the weight of other people's problems that fell on my shoulders only because of misplaced guilt. I resolved not to let this intrude on my life again. Ben's and my mother's calls, their pleas, these were attempts to pull me back into their world, where I was always at fault, even when reality had nothing to do with me. I decided not to answer their calls or go to the hospital. My peace had become my priority. A few weeks later, another call came through. This time, it was my mother. Her voice, coming through the speaker, was the first I'd heard from her since our last conversation before the wedding. "Jenny, it's your mom," she began cautiously. "I know you're angry. But Katie is in a rehabilitation center now, and she's trying really hard. If you visited her, it might motivate her even more. She wants to make amends. I know I keep asking you, and I'm sorry, but please, just think about it." After listening to the message, I deleted it without hesitation. My mother's words left me unmoved. Katie could try to make up for her mistakes all she wanted, but it changed nothing for me. Years of her lies and manipulation had left scars that would never fade. My heart had grown too tired to open up to them again. Despite my silence, the calls didn't stop. Ben left a lengthy message detailing Katie's condition and their hopes of starting over as a family. My mother sent me emails pleading with me to visit Katie, but I continued to ignore them. I knew I couldn't let these people disrupt my life anymore. A few months after Katie's suicide attempt, I unexpectedly ran into Chris. We crossed paths at a cafe, and the surprised look on his face told me he hadn't expected to see me. "Jenny," he said, offering a hesitant smile. "I didn't think I'd run into you here." I returned a faint smile, feeling a slight tension. At a nearby table, Paul was seated, watching the interaction but choosing not to intervene. "I'm here with my husband," I said, nodding in Paul's direction. Chris nodded but hesitated, as if gathering the courage to say something important. "I don't mean to intrude, but have you heard about Katie?" His words made me stiffen. "Chris, please," I interrupted, trying to remain calm. "I'm not interested in hearing about her rehabilitation or her changes. It's good that she's getting help, but that's not my concern." Chris frowned but pressed on. "She really is trying. I know it's hard for you to hear, but she acknowledges everything she's done and is working to make amends." "Chris, I don't owe her anything," I snapped, letting my irritation show. "Her lies destroyed my life. If she's truly changed, good for her. But I'm not letting her back in." Chris looked at me with sadness but seemed to understand that my decision wouldn't change. "I just thought you should know," he said before leaving. Paul, who had been watching the conversation from a distance, approached me once Chris had gone. His eyes were filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded slowly, feeling the tension begin to ease. "Yes. I just want to focus on what we have," I said, smiling genuinely. "Our life together is all I need." Over time, the calls and messages from my mother and Ben became less frequent and eventually stopped altogether. It seemed they had finally realized I wasn't going back. Katie likely came to terms with the fact that our relationship wouldn't be repaired either. I made the decision to move forward and not look back. With Paul, I built a life filled with warmth and love. The past still occasionally surfaced, but I had learned not to let it hold power over me. I had my own family now, and that was all that mattered.